Hey everyone, Galia Schmidt here from Maharani Business Law. We are coming at you today with another in our series about the many exemptions to the AB5 rule about independent contractor versus employee classification. So if you have no idea what any of those words I just said meant, please go check out our other video about AB5 and the basics of the rule of how to tell whether someone is categorized legally as a contractor or as an employee in California, because you're going to need to listen to that one first. But if you're here to listen and learn about some of the exemptions to that rule, you are in the right place. We're doing a series of these. And today we're going to be talking about the Professional Services Exemption. So hop on aboard. Let's do this. There are lots of them. And so this is what we're going to be talking about today. So it's called the Professional Services Exemption, but as you can see on the slide, there are actually over 15. Some of these are actually categorized. So 15 or more professions that fall into this category. So the way that this rule works is two-step process before we even get to figure out which independent contractor test we're using. So number one, we're going to figure out, is what you're doing on this list of professional services? If so, we're going to go next to a test that these professions have to then pass. And then if we pass that test, then we know to use the Borello test instead of the AB5 test for our classification process. So as you can see, this is kind of like a multi-step long thing. I am going to spend some time going through every single one of these professions, so you can get a little more information about whether or not one of these actually applies to you, because these are not straightforward definitions, as I'm sure you will not be surprised to know if you've watched any of our other videos about AB5. So basically, all of these have their own definitions in the rule mostly. I am giving the kind of shortened, condensed version of the definitions here. So that's the disclaimer. If you think that any one of these professions might apply to you or the contractor that you're trying to hire, please look into it more. Please contact a lawyer to make sure that this category actually applies to you. But this is the overarching kind of broad definitions, okay? So I'm just going to go through these one by one. So number one, marketing. So the definition of this in the rule is that there has to be some original work and some creativity that's going into the marketing. So, you know, it doesn't want you to just pump something through an algorithm or, you know, have something on an automated posting schedule. If I'm hiring someone for marketing and they want to fit into this category, they're doing something that is actually, you know, creative, an ad campaign. They're creating content for me, something that requires some originality. The HR rule is very similar. They want HR services to be intellectual, varied in character, it says, and they explicitly call out that it can't be the kind of work that can be standardized easily. So again, if we're just kind of looking at some algorithm or software that just kind of like pumps out the same information for people, probably not. But if we're writing, you know, individual unique handbooks for people or giving advice about specific situations going on in someone's business, that'll probably count. Travel agent is the next one, just the travel agent as defined by the Business and Professions Code. So if you are a travel agent, you probably know whether or not that applies to you. Graphic design and grant writer are the two that don't have any definitions at all. So hopefully you know whether you're a graphic designer or not, or a grant writer or not. There's definitely, I think, some room for ambiguity in there, but they didn't help us out. So so no definitions, but graphic design and grant writer are both on here. Fine artist, the definition that they put in here, I'm actually just going to read because it's hard to reword this one. So basically, a fine artist is someone who is creating art to be appreciated primarily or solely for their imaginative, aesthetic, or intellectual content, including drawings, paintings, sculptures, mosaics, works of calligraphy, works of graphic art, crafts, or mixed media. So basically, my interpretation of this definition is this is art for art's sake, right? This is someone who's creating art because they consider themselves an artist and they want to create art that makes a statement or make it something beautiful, or you know, to express themselves, something like that. So it's different than maybe art created as a graphic designer or a marketer, for example. Enrolled agents who are licensed by the IRS are on here. Payment processors, as long as they're an agent through an independent sales organization, are on here. The next four have very long and complex definitions, so I'm going to give each of those their own slide, but just to go over everything at once. Photographers and people adjacent to photographers, writers and writer adjacent, content contributors, we'll talk more about what that means, and estheticians and other people who kind of work in salons kind of professions. We'll go over those in more detail in a second. The next one is masterclass teachers. So this is basically, it's a performer that's hired by a performing arts company to teach a masterclass for no more than 1 week. And it has to be a course that's not regularly offered in this performing arts company. And it has to be an expert who doesn't teach for that place on a regular basis. So this is, as you can see, is a very, very, very specific situation and not very common, I would assume. Appraisers, as defined by the Business and Professions Code, and then licensed professional foresters. So I don't know if there's a lot of licensed professional foresters watching my videos, but if you are, then this exemption might apply to you. So let's go into the next few kind of specific ones. So the photography exemption. So this applies to still photographers, photojournalists, videographers, and photo editors. The ones that have little stars next to them, that just means there's more definitions that I want to get into. So photo editor means that they're doing the sort of ancillary work to the creation of digital content. So if you're doing something like retouching or editing or keywording, all those things count. So if you're one of those, there has to be a written contract, and that written contract has to include the rate of pay and an obligation to pay by a specific time. This also can apply to photographers, et cetera, who are contributing to digital content aggregators. So that's when the photographer gives a license to this intermediary content aggregator, and then the intermediary distributes it to third parties. So this includes things like, if you're posting your photography on a website that then, sells it for you, for example. So this doesn't apply. You can't use this rule if the photographer's job is sort of replacing the work that a regular employee would be doing. And the photographer is not supposed to be primarily working on location on site of the hiring business. And they're not supposed to have any restrictions at all for working for other clients at the same time. This doesn't apply at all to photographers who are doing work for motion pictures, theatrical or commercial productions, broadcast news, TV, or music videos, which is a huge bummer. And I don't really understand why they put that in here, because there are not separate exemptions for the motion picture or TV industry. So if you are in the TV or film industry, that sucks. This doesn't apply to you. Okay, so the writer rule is pretty similar. It applies to freelance writers, translator, editor, copy editor, illustrator, newspaper cartoonists. Again, there has to be a written contract, has to include rate of pay, obligation to pay by a specific time like the other, but also has to include information about the intellectual property rights, who owns what. Again, same restrictions as before, not replacing an employee, not work on location, not restricted for working for others. Content contributor, again, very similar. We're looking for content contributor, advisor, producer, narrator, or cartographer. If you are one of those things and you are doing the work to contribute to a journal, book, periodical, evaluation, other publication, or educational, academic, or instructional work in any format or media. Basically, if you are creating something that's going to be put together with other content that other people have been created, this one is the one that might apply. Same rules for written contract, rate of pay, IP rights, and obligation to pay by specific time. Same restrictions as before. And finally, estheticians, licensed electrologists, licensed manicurists, licensed barber, licensed cosmetologists. If you're one of those and you set your own rates, you process the payments yourself and you're paid directly by the client doesn't pay the salon, they pay you. You set your own hours. There's a typo there. Sole discretion to decide how many clients you take and which clients you take. You have your own book of business and you schedule your own appointments. So again, this is contrary to how a lot of salons do it. You book your own appointments. The salon doesn't book your appointments. You have a business license, and if you're renting a space from the salon, which is the common way to do this, you're doing a 1099. This rule right here, this slide, expires January 1st, 2022. So this will no longer apply this coming year. Okay, so that was all 15 plus of the professions that fall into this exemption. That was only step one. Hooray. So if you think you fall into one of those, then we still have another step. The next step here is that we now go through this test. So the contractor, or the person who wants to be a contractor, has to have a separate business location. So this doesn't mean that they have to be working at that separate business location, especially if it's something that has to be done on site for some reason. It just means that they have to have some place that's their own that they could go to. It can be their home if that's where they have their business license address. They can choose to perform on site if they want to, but there has to be some location other than on site. They have to have a business license in whatever city they're headquartered in or doing business in. They have to have the ability to set their own rates and the ability to set their own hours. So the hours one is relative to the work that they're doing. So obviously you have to have things like completion date, relative completion dates, reasonable business hours that you have to do work within. All that stuff is fine depending on the situation, but generally within those reasonable rules, they should be able to set their own hours. They have to either have other clients for whom they're doing the same type of work, or they're at least holding themselves out through advertising or a website or something as available to perform that same type of work for other people. And then finally, they have to use discretion in their performance. This just means, again, they have the ability to do the job the way that they think it should be done, and they're not having everything dictated to them by the hiring person, because then it would look like an employee. So again, that was 2 steps. Number 1, are you one of those professions? Number 2, do you pass this test on this slide? If so, then we're using the Borello test instead of the ABC test from AB5 to decide whether the person is a contractor or an employee. So again, if you watch that video, the Borello test is still a hard test to pass. So please review that video and see, but it's a little bit easier to pass than the ABC test. So it's one of the reasons why it's really important to understand these exemptions. So if you have any more questions about the professional services exemption and whether it applies to you or your contractor, please feel free to contact us. If you want to stick around and check out more of our free content, you can like and subscribe this video or to our YouTube channel. You can also follow our social media or sign up for our newsletter for alerts for when we post new free educational stuff, which we do all the time. So thanks for sticking around and listening, and I'll see you next time.